Early access is nothing new, but it's certainly caught on as of late in mainstream gaming, with Steam's early access and the Xbox equivalent, whatever that's called. Compulsion Games' kickstarted We Happy Few is one game taking advantage of both platforms. But with all the negative views surrounding a once promising game, is that really the right word? Advantage. Is advantage the right word, not any of the others in that sentence? Advantage. My colleague and one-time professional hoop-with-a-stick player, Joanna Mueller, uploaded a video of the first-person drug-induced survival game not long ago. I'm paraphrasing, but her words are pointed, to say the least. "This is the worst game I've ever played," she said. "I can't believe anyone would release a game in this state." She also said the game was, she genuinely did say this part, hard and confusing, and like 3 other players I watched, she was totally unable to get out of the starting area. Just about everything in We Happy Few is in a broken state right now. The food, hydration, and sleep meters deplete way too quickly, quest essential items are randomly generated and more often than not don't spawn, quests don't tell you where to go or why you should be doing them, and perhaps the biggest failure, the story mode isn't in the game yet. If you remember the E3 trailer earlier this year, Compulsion Games heavily pitched the story mode of the game. The whole trailer was nothing but the story stuff, which looked downright incredible. While what goes on in that trailer is in the game as a prologue, the actual meat of the story mode isn't on offer yet, and that, above anything else, has been their biggest mistake. They said from day one that story mode won't be ready for early access, which is fair enough. But it makes you wonder why, on the heels of releasing an open-world sandbox game with no story, without any of the interesting writing or player choices we saw, they would release something telling us that's what we'd eventually be getting. The trailer created so many false expectations, especially with people who never even heard of the game before. But it's not exclusive to them. I saw one Let's Player, who backed the Kickstarter on day one they claim, who didn't realize the starting area wasn't the only area in the game. He was complaining about how he felt ripped off because the big city-like towns with the rainbow streets we were promised weren't in the game after all. They are in the game, they're just beyond the starting area. If that's what he thought, someone who backed the game, imagine how someone who only saw the E3 trailer must feel after getting their hands on this train wreck of a release. Granted, We Happy Few was put in a uniquely bad situation with that poorly planned trailer, but early access in general tends to do a lot of harm. Compulsion Games aren't even the only Kickstarter developer who felt the wrath of early access. Red Hook Studios, developers of The Darkest Dungeon, experienced the same thing as Compulsion Games, though in reverse. People loved the game when it first released, but after a series of changes and tweaks in the updates, it became hated and a much worse game overall. Then there's Hinterland Studio, whose game The Long Dark released 2 years ago on early access. While it saw some pretty good reviews and positive coverage when it came out, it's pretty much disappeared now, and just like We Happy Few, its story mode still hasn't released either. Both The Long Dark and The Darkest Dungeon listened to extensive feedback and met different fates. Even The Long Dark, whose changes have widely been liked by the community, has still fallen into obscurity. When these 2 games do finally release their story mode, is anyone going to care? Will they still be relevant even though players already know more or less what they're getting into, that have already spent countless hours in them? As the old saying goes, you only get one first impression. But wait a minute, this isn't the first impression of WHF. An alpha build was made available to backers early on, and reviews of that were positive. Jim Sterling, who hated the early access version, loved the alpha. This is also the second Sterling reference this week. Nice. So, what happened? How did things go so wrong so relatively quickly? The obvious answer is the backers, honestly. Throughout development, Compulsion Games asked for feedback from backers on the Kickstarter-exclusive pre-alpha builds, and kept updating it with that feedback in mind. I found a couple of old posts browsing through the forums. Someone suggested that crafting recipes should be hidden from players, and the developers agreed, which did make it into the final game. That's one of the things players hate. Another commenter suggested that the game was too hard, but was shot down by everyone else, including one commenter sounding more like Old Man yelling at Cloud. And who knows what the backers said in all these surveys the teams kept sending out. A big question is how an experienced developer could make so many poor choices in the first place. Randomly generating quest essential items is a stupid idea. Forcing players to eat, sleep, and drink every 2 or 3 minutes is absurd. Letting players get the plague, which is fatal in a matter of minutes, without giving them any way to cure themselves due to the random generation, is the stupidest thing in the world. Backers might have given them some bad or misinformed ideas, but there comes a point when you have to wonder what the developers themselves were thinking. In its current state, We Happy Few couldn't realistically get much worse. It's going to get better, I have no doubt about that, but I do doubt if it'll ever live up to the hype and expectations. If it somehow does, it's hard to say if people are going to give it another chance. Thus the inherent problem with early access. It's all well and good when you release a game that's already pretty good, but if you release a broken alpha like Compulsion did, or make the game worse over time because of the feedback like Red Hook, you've shot yourself in the foot before you're even out the door. Even if you do manage to pull it off, there's no guarantee people are gonna care after a year or two when it's finally finished, as is turning out to be the case with The Long Dark. Crowdfunding might be a gamble, but early access is Russian roulette, and there's more than one bullet in the chamber.